I don't know how many of you are familiar with Google, or how familiar you may be with Google. But with my children and my family, if they ask questions that we don't know the answer to, we say, "Children, the Googler has the knowledge of the whole world, and it's at your fingertips." I have to amend that. Google has made an error, because when I Googled November 14th, 1966, the first story that came up was that Muhammad Ali beat Cleveland Williams in 3 rounds. The next story that came up was about some Air Force C-141 becoming the first jet to land in Antarctica. I kept searching and could only find a story about astronauts going outside of the Gemini capsule, and I had about given up because I know that the Googler made a mistake. Because on November 14th, 1966, in Fort Worth, Texas, this was the site of one of the greatest miracles the world has ever known. In the verses from Ecclesiastes, the author tells about the world that God sets before each of us with opportunities to explore anything and everything we can imagine. And it always begins with a miracle. And that miracle took place in Fort Worth, Texas, on, of all days, a Monday, as Mary and John Wood welcomed their miracle, Gregory Earl Wood, into the world. And with him came all the hopes and dreams that come with the miracle of life. Now, that bouncing baby boy came out, I'm pretty sure, already telling the world that he had 2 sisters. One that was 10 years older. She appreciated that. And the other that was his youngest sister. She was older than he was, but she was his youngest. You know Greg. He was silly. And by the time there was a time for getting spoiled, and I can tell you, Greg was spoiled. His sisters, Mary and Donna, reminded him all the time that he was obviously the favorite. But the truth is, everyone loved Greg. And Greg loved everyone. He was spoiled. He always wore a devilish grin, but he was also the spoiler in chief, who gave without question, the most generous and kind soul I have ever met. Growing up in Fort Worth, Greg went to Amon Carter Riverside High School and was a classmate with a woman who is familiar to us, Elaine Dupuy. We'll talk about her later. Elaine and Greg were in science club together. It probably won't surprise any of you when I say that Greg was a nerd in high school. I appreciate that. I'm a nerd. Now, don't get offended, because he was. And as a fellow nerd, I support that the name has been appreciated and rehabilitated. I wish I could have been nerdy with Greg. I wish I could have been in science club. I wish I had been with him when he saw Star Wars for the first time, because I know what it was like when I saw Star Wars for the first time, and I have no doubt that he reacted with the same joy that he did with so many other things. He called it a true story of redemption, and it is, and he wanted to share it with everyone, but I'm getting ahead of myself. After graduating from high school, there was a time to work, and it should come as no surprise that Greg was called to work in the healthcare industry where he could help others. Greg was a natural caregiver and been taking care of people from the very beginning. And so working at All Saints for 25 years made sense. And it was a world that he loved. The thing that he loved most, other than just taking care of other people, though, was that he got to work with his sisters, who was 10 years older than him. You might have picked up that that was Greg's favorite taunt. And while Mary had been at the hospital longer than Greg, she soon became known as Greg's sister, not the other way around. And there was a time to work. And Greg poured everything he had into his work. At this point in his life, though, was the time where I think Greg lived up to his truest calling, and that was everyone's favorite funkle. If you don't know what funkle is, it's just fun uncle. And if you looked it up, there would be a picture of Greg. If you thought Greg spoiled everyone around him, you should have seen him with his nieces and his nephews and his great-nieces and his nephews, and it all started off innocently with short little trips to Six Flags or to Astro World. It grew into going to the Olympics in 1996 in Atlanta, and finally a mission to take every single one of them to Disney World. And Disney World was their trip, and Greg planned for days and weeks and months. He wouldn't allow them to call their parents because it was their time, and the Funkle took charge. He knew the parks frontwards and backwards. He would make sure the kids did quizzing them when they would come over. He had every last minute scheduled so there was time to hit every single ride. He did the research, and he knew which days to visit which park and where to eat, and everything was scheduled to the minute. Don't stop to go to the restroom once you hit the gate. Don't stop to do your hair once you get to the gate. If you hit there at 8, your next thing is at 8:02. Oh, and he reserved the right to take pictures the whole time. You may have noticed that for Greg, there was a time to take pictures, even if you weren't aware of it. I remember one Sunday when I was preaching and I got a text notification on my iPad because, of course, Greg was an Apple fan. He knew I would get a text notification on my iPhone, and I opened it up in the middle of my sermon, and it was a picture of me preaching in the middle of my sermon. I looked around, and there was Greg sitting off to my right, hunkered down, his whole body shaking as he tried to control his laughter. Finally, in 2009, there was a time for love. I told you we would get back to this. And it came while attending a planning session for his 25th high school reunion. Yes, 25 years after graduating from high school, Greg was reunited with his science club friend, Elaine. And this time he wasn't going to let her get away. Coffee, a little dinner at Mamma Mia's, a trip to Disneyland that he also planned to the minute, this time even if it was Elaine's treat. And Greg was smitten. How smitten, you may ask? So smitten that when Elaine couldn't get to the hospital and her mother was there, Greg went and sat after they dated twice. The best part is that when Greg and Elaine decided to get married, Greg made sure Elaine knew that nieces and nephews and great-nieces and nephews got to go to Disney World. For Greg, there was a time to love. A time for silliness, a time for jokes, a time for serious conversations, a time for fun. Did I mention a time for love? Because love is what Greg did best. The love that Greg had for his friends and his family was limitless. And he made you feel special all of the time, not just when it was your special day. But Greg also loves stuff. Now, not material stuff. He never had much use for that unless, as I mentioned, it was the newest Apple product. Greg liked stuff like Star Wars and Star Trek and everything Disney and A Christmas Carol and the movie Clue and traveling and Guinness. I know this. When Greg was in Ireland, he sent a picture to me every single day of him holding up a glass of Guinness. And he loved to share everything that he loved. When The Force Awakens, the first of the Star Wars sequels, came out, Greg had a plan and orchestrated a movie marathon at the church for the first 6 episodes. And so one Sunday we were there for 10 hours watching the original Star Wars movies. Then we were there for another 10 hours watching the next 3. And then he invited everyone he knew to go and see the premiere. Not the premiere the day it came out, the premiere at 11:59 in the evening. And I don't know what my boys and I expected when we joined him on this venture, but we walked in the door and there had to be 20 or 30 people, all in Greg's group. Because Greg made plans. He loved to share what he loved, and when he loved it 1,000 times over. Greg had an uncompromising faith, the highest ethical standards, and a love beyond comprehension. There's a meme that's been going around about ancestral math. It says that we all have two grandparents and four grandparents and 8 great-grandparents and 16 great-great-grandparents and 32 3 times great and 64 4 times great and 128 5 times great and 256 6 times great and 512 7 times great and 1,024 8 times great and 2,048 9 times great. And Greg would be doing the math right now. And for each of us to be here today, 12 generations, 4,094 ancestors from over 400 years were needed for this moment. How many struggles, how many battles, how many difficulties, how much sadness, how much happiness, how many love stories, how many expressions of love for the future did your ancestors have to go through for you to exist? I believe that all 4,094 of Greg's ancestors are joining God right now and saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant." On January 12th, Greg's body was tired. And it was time for him to die, a time for him to hug his mother again, a time for him to give his dad a kiss on the cheek, a time to be with God after a life well lived. And his legacy is each of you. Not just his sisters and his nieces and his nephews and his great-nieces and great-nephews and his beloved Elaine, although he loved them beyond comprehension, but everyone here. You see, Greg brought out the best in all of us, and he entered our lives at the time when we needed him most. And now, in the middle of our tears, we give Greg back to God with tears in our eyes, but hearts filled with the hope that he saw in the world around him and in the future. Amen. would like to thank the Open Door House Band. You all have missed you. You're wonderful. Immediately following the service, there will be an interment service. You can follow the motorcade to get there. After the interment service, there will be a family meal at Victory Baptist Church. I tried to translate this prayer into Klingon, Elaine. It didn't work for me. Will you please pray with me? God of love, we thank you for all with which you have blessed us, even to this day. For the gift of joy in days of health and strength, and for the gifts of your abiding presence and promise in the days of pain and grief, we praise you for home and friends, and for our baptism and place in your church, with all who have faithfully lived and died. Above all else, we thank you for Jesus, who knew our griefs, who died our death, and rose for our sake, and who lives and prays for us. Amen.